Good morning and welcome to History of Interiors. Today we will be discussing the French Empire style, which is associated with the reign of Napoleon. It lasted from 1804 to 1820. So before we can actually dive into the Empire style, there is a bit of a gap between the end of the French neoclassical style and the Empire style, and that's going to be known as the Directoire style. So it lasted from 1789 to 1804. So if you'll remember, in 1793, that is when Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette are killed during the French Revolution. However, France isn't going to see another singular ruler come into play until Napoleon does much later. In the meantime, France is ruled by a directorate, which is a small group of new wealthy who ruled during the transition following the revolution. And then some of the elements that we see involved with this specific design style are the splayed Clismos leg and Grecian curved back being introduced into the French style. So it's a much more simplified style than what we have looked at before, but it brings back a lot of those Greek elements that we have studied several times. We also still see some tapered legs left from the neoclassical style, so there definitely is an overlap in between the time that France is transitioning from the neoclassical to the Empire style. Alright, so here you can see an interior from that Directoire style, and you can notice the use of Greek elements throughout. So if you look over here, you will see that curule stool, and then if you look here, you see the tripod tables, and while they are quite simplified, you can even see some of the Clismos legs here. All of the Greek elements are slowly starting to revive themselves and make their way back into the style of this time period. Alright, so the main image that I want you to pay attention to on this slide is this one down here. Though you can see it throughout, you've got that really simplified look, but you still get the classical tripod table. And we're still seeing kind of those animal feet. But everything is very simplified, and in comparison to the size that we had looked at before with the other French styles, these are going to be relatively small in comparison. Alright, so here's a chair where you can really see those splayed Clismos legs, and they do create a kind of cornucopia style look, which will become important in a minute as that's one of the features of the Empire style. But once again, this is very different from the tapered leg that we saw with the neoclassical French style. So we can see that transition in between the neoclassical and the Empire style. And it's being interpreted in a new and fresh way. So once again, on this slide, you are seeing that same Clismos leg base, though this one does have a taller back and those rounded arms as well. However, still very much in that Directoire style, overly simplified to some degree in comparison to what we've seen common in this time period. This is much simpler than what preceded it by far. But as you can tell, some of those newer revival elements are coming into play. And this chair is still from that Directoire style. However, you can see the last remnants of that neoclassical style. So you can still see the tapered leg here, but you're also seeing that curved back, which was quite popular with Greek style chairs as well. So you are getting that blend between the two styles. Alright, so now we're going to dive into the background of the French Empire style. So the first important thing to note is that Napoleon comes to power. And this does take a while after the actual end of the reign of Louis XVI. There's that period in between that we just spoke about But that was a pretty tumultuous time determining, now that we've gotten rid of the king, who gets this power, who runs our country, and how are we going to make that selection? But he eventually makes his way into power, beating out anyone in that directorate, sorry. But he calls himself an emperor, so he refers to himself as Little Caesar, and he wants to be seen as powerful as the Roman emperors were, which is why he's trying to recall himself back to Caesar. He was a military general, and you'll see the military influence throughout all of his design choices. In terms of his influences, most of these were because of his conquest. So Napoleon didn't just want to take over France, he wanted to build the full empire, which is why we refer to this as the Empire time period. Once again, he was trying to build Rome, recreate that within the bounds of France. So to do that, he had to go out and conquer other lands. Therefore, he interacted a lot with the Greek, Roman, and Egyptian styles. And we're going to see each of those influence his interior style quite a bit. So on this slide, you can see a portrait of Napoleon, and this would have been a state portrait, which is incredibly important, especially when you're trying to create an empire that is massive and expansive. So a state portrait essentially serves the role of king when the king is not present. And it just basically reminds the people who's in power. And this is not a concept that has gone away to this day in every United States post office or government building. There is an image of the president, and that directly relates back to the idea of a state portrait and what these were intended to convey. So it was intended to convey, like I said, the rule of the person without the person being physically present in that room at that time. All right, so we're going to touch on just a little bit more background about Napoleon's first wife, Josephine. She was born in the Caribbean and was the toast of Paris. She had been married before. Her first husband was actually guillotined during the French Revolution. And she would later be replaced by Maria of Austria, who was able to give Napoleon a son, which would have been incredibly important to him, as he definitely needed an heir in order to continue his power. So Napoleon aimed to showcase his power in whichever ways possible, and that includes in his interiors. So the first place you're going to notice that is in the color scheme. So you see these really dark, brilliant, full pigment colors, very similar to what you would see on a military uniform. It's much darker than the neoclassic. We have gotten rid of pastels almost entirely. So some examples you're going to see, like I said, full hue, red, blue, green, yellow, gold, and purple. So he wanted to make the colors of France stand out again. There's also the influence of a military tent. Remember that he was a military man and believed in incorporating that in all aspects of his lifestyle. So the room shape as well as draped fabric would take influence from these military tents that he would have been accustomed to staying in as he was trying to conquer the rest of Europe. You also see a low dado, or what we would refer to as a wainscot. It now sits pretty low on the wall, similar to the chair rail that we see today. On this slide, you see an image of that French Empire interior, and as you can tell, it has a very rich color scheme. You see those really bright emerald greens, but you can also see the influence of Greek styles in the curved back of the chair, though you are still seeing a very militaristic style on the legs of the furniture, and you're also seeing Greek influence in the furnishings such as the tripod table, as well as some of the other decorative elements around the room. So you're going to see a lot of those patterns brought back, that guilloche or military braid style, really become quite popular during this time period. Okay, so once again in this interior you can see those really rich pigments going on. So the color scheme all goes back to that really deep, rich military uniform style of color. But you can also see, especially on this table up front, the use of the Greek figures. So you've got all sorts of stuff going on here, but the most important one that you can see are the caryatids that sit at the base. If you'll remember, that is something that is distinctly Greek, and that is where Napoleon would have drawn the inspiration. So here you can see that on even a larger scale. So you do have this tripod table up front, as well as the crewel table here, so you can see that X-shaped pattern. One of the major things that we talked about earlier was the tent-like feature, and you can see that here in the draperies. So that's going to be that draped fabric that's shaped in the style of a military tent. And the other thing that you can also see here is a bed. And you'll notice that it kind of curves in like so, and we refer to that as a gondola bed. So it kind of has the shape of a gondola, and it was a quite popular bed style during the French Empire time period. Alright, so here you can see that Klismos leg and the curved back once again. And another major element that you can also notice in this specific interior is the use of large-scale scenery wallpaper. Remember that he would have interacted with spaces in which there were paintings like this. He would have seen many rooms that had the fully frescoed walls that were never as popular in France as they were elsewhere. But you were able to accomplish a quite similar look in much less time by using wallpaper, which is why this would have been so popular and so critical to his interiors. Okay, so now we're going to dive into some of the furniture that was quite popular during this time. So first you'll notice that everything is in a very heavy scale. It was meant to look as though it were created for Caesar himself, and therefore everything needed to be large, everything needed to be grand. We also see the use of lots of different styles of wood. So you've got mahogany, ebony, and rosewood becoming quite popular. The influences, as we've discussed before, come mostly from the areas that Napoleon conquered, as well as from his military style. So from Egypt, you're going to see the animal feet, the Sphinx, and the obelisk. In the military influence, you're going to see the use of the star, the laurel leaves, the drums, and the tents. And then from Greece, you'll see the Klismos chair, the Grecian curve in the backs. So those are the main areas of influence that shape his style and change it from the Louis XVI style and the Directoire style. Some of the furniture pieces that you're going to see, you're still going to see that fauteuil and bergère chair. Both of those will remain quite popular. Remember that the fauteuil has an open arm, the bergère does not. Then you're also going to see a guerdon, which is the tripod table, and then a gondola bed, which we just discussed a couple of images ago. It has that Grecian curved back / arm, and it also features that cornucopia or splayed Klismos leg. So this slide here shows you an image of a secretary. This middle part would have folded down to become a writing desk of sorts, and it had drawers for storage underneath. You can see the use of the animal feet here. So once again, you're seeing the really straight lines of the main piece of furniture, but you're also seeing those added elements of the animal feet, as well as the female figure here. And so all of those were influenced by other places and really pulled together And I think that that's what makes this style so interesting is that, yes, it is technically a revival, but it's a revival of several different styles all coming together as one. It is not a true Greek revival, nor is it a true Roman or Egyptian revival. We're seeing all of that kind of melting into one another to create uniquely empire-style pieces. And once again, you can see that same military influence, especially here with these military-like braids on the legs of the piece. You can also see Greek influence from the use of the caryatids, really ancient influence. You would have also seen those in Rome and Egypt as well. But like I said, just look for areas in which you can see things that we have discussed before and notice how they were revived for this specific style. So not only did you have the rich colors becoming quite prominent here, you also still had the use of gold remaining heavily influential. In this image here, you can still see that tent-like drapery, as well as the cruel stool, so it's the X stool. And then another element that you can see that also comes from Greek influence is the use of the lyre, which is the musical instrument, so Lyre. I apologize for my writing. I'm trying to use like a trackpad on a laptop. But the lyre, which is kind of like a harp of sorts, was a really popular musical instrument in Greek times, and it was often used on their furniture as well. And so as we see the Greek style being revived, we're also seeing the use of that lyre shape again. So here you can just see, once again, all of those elements that we've talked about. You've got the armchair, the decorative chair, the sofa, the tripod table, and another armchair. Once again, notice that rounded Greek back, the lyre motif on the back of the chair, that gondola-style sofa, and that klezmos-style chair leg. Sorry, the chair leg is the splayed klezmos style. Moving on to the ornamental motifs, most of these we just spoke about, so you should be able to recognize them quite easily. In the Egyptian influence column, we have the animal feet, the sphinx, and the obelisk making returns. In the military style, we have the stars, the laurel leaves, the wreath, and the drum, and the tent. In the Greek influence category, we have the klezmos leg and the Grecian curve in the back of chairs. And lastly, we have his monogram, so N for Napoleon, and he was also quite fond of the B pattern. Once again, this is a style that we will see in other countries. So in England, we're going to see a lot of these same elements used in the English Regency style. And in America, we're going to see it in the Greek Revival and American Empire styles. So that is all that I have for you today, but I hope you have a great rest of your day and good luck with the rest of your module.